Hey, welcome back to another episode of Talk to My Agent. I'm your host, Max Lowenthal, Director of Agent Product here at Decagon. Super exciting episode today. We have Madhu, previously Chief Product Officer at Chime, Product Leader at Robinhood, Notion, tons of businesses here on the show, talking a little bit about AI, where we're heading in the future, how you can build trust in highly regulated industries like financial services, fintech, lots of good stuff to cover. So excited to dig in.
Thanks, Max. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Well, Monty, listen, there's a ton of stuff for us to get into today. I want to start big and then get small, but maybe let's just do a quick intro on you. Tell me a little bit more about your story, where you're coming from, your background.
Sure. Most recently, as you mentioned, I was the Chief Product Officer at Chime, the largest neobank in the United States. I was there for 2.5 years, helping build the company out and get it ready to be both public, but also set itself up for its next stage of growth. Before that, relevantly, I led product at Robinhood, the largest neo brokerage in the United States. I was there from when the company was a lot smaller, under 100 employees, all the way through to its IPO. So spent a lot of time in fintech. Outside of fintech, I've led product at companies like Notion. I've built product teams at companies like Twitter and Oculus. And so a lot of my spare time is spent thinking about how to make great experiences for regular, everyday Americans.
Yeah, fantastic. Lots of knowledge to dig into there. One of the things I would love to start about to discuss is consumer expectations. I imagine this is a huge thing that you spend time considering. What are the digital experiences that people are looking for? How can we give them kind of the best experience? I'm curious from your perspective in working on all of these consumer apps, how do consumer expectations kind of intersect with financial services, right? Money movement, support, fraud, trust. Let's start there and then we can start to layer on some of the complexity.
Totally. I think when I started my career, I was often working on products that I would call nice to have. And I think that's sort of where most of tech started, which is people started using technology and apps to entertain themselves or maybe to communicate with people. But it wasn't until recently, call it the last kind of 10 or 15 years, that people started moving really, really core parts of their lives into technology and onto apps. And specifically, if you think about financial services, like your everyday banking or your long-term investing or your health, these have been sort of the slowest moving things compared to, sharing pictures of your cat or telling people where you went on vacation.
Sure.
I think that kind of tracks in line with trust. It tracks in line with, hey, is there something neat and novel versus is there something really powerful and something that I can trust on the other end? And so when you think about building great experiences in these kind of core areas of people's lives, I think you start seeing huge emphasis on things like safety, security, data privacy, customer support, what happens when things go wrong, not just the happy cases of how great is this going to be on a good day. So I think customer expectations first started with what they're willing to use and what they're not willing to use. Now today we live in a very different time where there's an app for almost everything that you would do in your life, no matter how core it is. But I think that's been an evolution of trust more than anything else.
Well, so I'm curious, right? In a world where consistency is the most important factor, like it is certainly in financial services, I know people talk a lot today about like delight and taste and loyalty, right? How do you build those experiences in a world where ultimately people aren't necessarily looking for maybe the traditional ways people do that? It's more about how consistent are you in what you're building. How do you maintain that delight and that experience?
Yeah, that's right. And I think, again, it goes back to how important or core something is in your life. So I'll take an example of maybe a product that I really have liked for a long time. That's music streaming and Spotify. I love Spotify. It just works. And to your point, the kind of elements of delight are embedded inside of it. How quickly does the app open? What do they do at the end of the year? I just got my Wrapped. I was particularly happy about it. What do the covers look like? How quickly does it work in your car? And so I think for great products, it's everything. It's every little detail. And now that people are moving more and more of their lives onto their phones and onto their apps, they notice all these little things. They know what a great experience looks like because they use Spotify, because they use Instagram, because they use a series of products, Google Photos. And so now when you start looking at that from the lens of, okay, we want to be your financial services provider, you have to meet that bar on the happy path. So that means, hey, when someone decides that they're going to try your product for the first time, they're going to download it. Well, that first day, that'll be pretty easy to get started or easy to deposit money, or the animations have to feel like they're quite smooth because those are all the symbols of trust. I think what makes it harder, though, is unlike maybe music streaming, is that when something goes wrong, it's make or break all over again. And with these maybe not as core products in your life, there's no knock on them. If they don't work right away or they're having a bad day, yeah, there's definitely some angst and people will worry. Oh no, why is the streaming not working? Okay, I'm going to wait for a statement from Spotify globally about why this went down and what they're going to do for me. Or, hey, my Google Photos didn't load, something's gone wrong. I'm going to look for a statement. When you get to personal things like your money, that's not good enough. I'm going to call you on the phone. I'm going to send you a note, and I want to hear from a person. I want to hear from that person now. And you are going to get judged. You're going to get judged on the quality of that interaction in that moment. And that's going to outweigh all the little things that you had to do before too. So I think in financial services, that's part of the fun of building it. You're not just looking for these happy path, beautiful sort of symbols of trust that we're all sort of used to now in the modern age. It's also when things don't go well, whether that's your doing or whether that's your customers doing, if things don't go well, you really have to step up.
The stakes are just higher, right? Ultimately, I feel like in the space you're working in, the margin for error is thinner when it comes to people's livelihoods.
Exactly. And I think that because especially things that are core, they matter the most in those moments. And that's when people are going to make decisions of if they're going to stay with you for their whole life or if they're going to find a competitor and switch. That's the story they're going to tell people anytime someone asks. Maybe you pull a card out of your pocket and someone says, oh, what's that? Why did you pick them? You got two choices. You're going to either get the really good day of when you started and why you started, or let me tell you the story about when blank happened. And that's not a surprise. I mean, if you take a look at financial services, the incumbent players, a lot of them have 100-year histories. And they have a 100-year history not because it's a slow-moving space. Sure, it's hard. They have it because that's how long it takes to build trust. And if you're American Express, if you're Wells Fargo, if you're Visa, these companies have been around for very long periods of time, not just on the back of promises made on good days, but oftentimes on the other side. Hey, what happens when a card is gone? What happens when you can't log in? What happens when you really need some help? And so I think, you're designing for both, especially in financial services.
Well, I'm just curious, right? And you having been at the bleeding edge here, and when you're working with contemporaries and peers that are centuries old at this point, how do you build that trust quickly, right? Because inevitably you want to create value for users. You ideally don't want it to have to take 100 years. And clearly from seeing some work you've done in the past, it hasn't, right? We're accelerating quickly. What do you think has been the biggest thing that's let you front run that ability to build trust? Is it these technological experiences? Is it this loyalty? Is focus on delight? Like how do you, I guess, like even the bar?
Yeah, good question. I think all of the above. I think you have to have some value that you're delivering that goes above and beyond, and technology makes that possible. And you don't need a brick and mortar building to deliver great service. You can do that on device. You can do that at a better price point. You could do that in a more globally accessible way, and people tend to really like that. That is certainly one step. I'd like to believe another part of that is the consumer experience itself, making it simple, making it easy to use, making it something that's very intuitive that others can show you, as opposed to something that's complicated or really technical or web driven. But then on the last part, I think a lot of it comes down to sort of this cycle, just like anything in your life with trust. It's usually about setting an expectation, delivering on that expectation, and then doing that over and over and over and over again. So if you're Robinhood, that might mean, hey, I'm going to open the app really fast and I want to see what my portfolio is worth at this moment. And if it opens quickly and it loads you that balance and you can check it really fast, that's great. If you happen to do that 3, 4, 5 times a day, and we happen to be a provider for you for 3 months or 4 months, we're going to gain trust over that time period. Now, of course, there are going to be days where that number is going to be higher, lower, slower to load, et cetera. And in those moments, I do think there's a multiplier effect. It's like, hey, when it's slower to load, why, when, right? And so I think you have to play on all sides. You have to play on the sides of delivering something amazing. If you don't, all the predictability in the world isn't really worth too much. But then on the other hand, I think a lot about the conversation you're having with your customers digitally that's different than everything else, because you can see them 4, 5, 6, 7 times a day. That's a real advantage. And you can start to build that relationship with good communication, good predictability, and then being there if something goes wrong.
Well, let's layer in AI here a little bit, right? So we're talking a little bit about technology and consistency and I guess like delight as a experience to build trust. What role is AI playing in an industry where the stakes continue to be so high and frankly, in any space, right, where people are engaging with your product on a regular basis?
Totally. I think it's a spectrum. I think it starts with, hey, can we provide really great service through the people that we have today? And so, can you have AI agents that superpower your current agents, right? They're already there. They're already talking to your customers. They are in many ways the embodiment of your brand, the embodiment of your experience when something goes wrong. And so step one is almost always, hey, can we use technology to make those individuals better ambassadors for us to our customers? Step two, though, is you start getting into the actual service itself. And there's a few dimensions that a lot of people look at. These are certainly the ones I've looked at other places in my career. But one is speed. When things are going wrong, people want someone to talk to now. And They want to talk to them quickly. They don't want to stay on a line. There's all the classic memes of waiting on the line for the DMV or waiting on the waiting music, and having to be there all day. People want speed. Speed is a sign of respect. It's a sign of reliability. It's a sign of being there. So I think that's certainly one component. And AI can definitely help with that. It doesn't mean that you have to solve the entirety of the problem within the first 1 second of the call, but you definitely can start responding quickly, triaging and understanding what's happening, and then making good decisions, in a time frame that meets and surpasses sort of your customer expectation. I think the next part of that is resolution. Does my problem actually get solved?
Sure.
And I think the irony of this is people have trained themselves to not talk to companies when they don't expect their problem to be solved. Like, we've been taught over the last 5 or 6 years that, no, there is no phone number for you to call. Good luck Googling it. If you find them, you're going to be on wait forever, which goes to speed. And the second is, even if this happens, the person's not going to know, or they're not going to help you. There's all these tricks that get shared around about how you get to a manager, et cetera. A lot of that isn't because companies are malicious. A lot of that is because companies either can't afford to spend all the time on the phone with their customers. They would love to otherwise, or they don't understand the problem and they can't train people well enough. And again, this is a place where I think AI can do a really great job, which is everything from the most mundane detail that you might not want to train every single agent on, all the way up to complex queries. You can start having AIs help you so that you're able to resolve questions, be a reasonable partner on the other side. And then I think the last part, we're yet to see this at scale, but I think it's coming, is just context. Like, people want to be spoken to in a way that gives them a sense that the person on the other side of the line cares about them. And that might look like, being trained to be empathetic. That might look like, having the right information to be competent, but it also might be speaking the right language. It also might be picking up the phone at 2 a.m. as opposed to 2 p.m. It also might be knowing what the last 3 calls were about, so that someone can say, oh, great, I don't have to re-explain this whole story to somebody else. So I think speed is a big part of it. I think resolution is obviously a big part of it. But that last bit of just the right amount of context, the right amount of understanding so that a person can speak your language and show you they care, it's coming. And AI is, capable of doing all these things.
One of the conversations, is interesting to bring this up, that I'm having with a lot of business leaders as we're building and deploying their AI agents, effectively is like, where do I start though? Right? I think ultimately, even the context of support, for example, I think most of these mature business leaders, people who are in positions like yourself, recognize that the end result we're looking for is a concierge experience, something that can solve anything, ideally even predict and resolve your problems before you realize it's an issue. I think ultimately, though, the thing they struggle with is prioritization. So you've been in the seat. I think you've given the thought to, great, conceptually, I understand why this is useful. How do I then apply it in practice? What are the frameworks, the decision-making process, the way you've organized your teams? How are you just building an operating structure that actually lets you capture value from a lot of this, kind of like theoretical belief?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a great quote from Arthur Ashe. I know it because my dad used to say it to me all the time.
Sure.
And it's start where you are, use what you have, do what you can.
Yeah.
And I think that's the right mentality. I think if you're waiting for some perfect model or some beautiful diagram or the exact right point in time, it's not going to work very well for any company. And so, I know that it can be difficult to understand how to get started, but I do think the first steps are usually good steps regardless of what they are. And so for us at Chime, and certainly in my time at Robinhood, I would say we solve problems like this by starting small, picking areas that we have experts, people who are passionate inside the company, where we can make forward progress in a short period of time. So that might start with something as simple as, hey, we're on the phone with our customers a lot. Let's start transcribing these conversations for ourselves and then having control over them, reading them with an AI and getting insights. How do we know we can do that? Well, we do it already. We have quality control folks. We have people sampling these conversations. We already have a vendor that allows us to record, whatever it might be. But I do think just taking almost any steps is the first step. And then you can sort of iterate from there and say, okay, well, here are the parts that are working. Here are the parts that aren't working. Invariably, I think there's a couple things specifically with AI that become very important. The first is the quality of the data you have. So it's very hard to tell anybody, any agent, what to do if they don't have really good data. And so the first step is often just trying to figure out, okay, what data do we actually have so that we can spend some time understanding and developing, some procedures that an agent can execute for us. The second part of that then is also, how good are your SOPs? So you might have really good data and you can say, okay, I know exactly when someone calls. I know the 10 things, what their account is, who they are, what the problem is likely to be. That's super. Do you have good SOPs for regular agents, or are you still relying on the back of extraordinary employees, which is totally fine if you're a small startup. That's often how things work. You had 5 or 6 really awesome people who read between the lines and make things happen. But I will say that in sort of the age of AI, just knowing what you know and knowing what you want to do become the first 2 most important steps. And then after that, it is truly just some iteration. It's like, okay, what's an observable small thing we can do? Like I said, maybe it's summarizing and synthesizing. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's forking off one channel and saying, okay, we're going to try some experiments where we have AIs help our agents answer these questions. But you just build it slow and steady. And then before you know it, you gain that confidence and that internal kind of experience to be able to go really, really fast.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, right? When we're working with both the scaled and scaling, I guess, in established businesses, the way that I often advise folks is it's pretty straightforward. What do we want to build? When do we want to build it by? Who's going to build it? And what do we need to do to get there? Right? I think like if you can have answers to even like 2 or 3 of those questions, you don't need answers for all of them. To some degree, that's the benefit of us having done this as frequently as we have, as we can come with an opinionated stance. If you can even start to scratch the surface of those things, that lets the ball just start to roll down the hill so much more quickly. Because if you know where you want to get, at least we know where we're going. We can figure out the path to get there. Now, how fast, of course, is a trade-off as well. From your perspective, what does the right level of investment look like at scale for one of these businesses? How are you like organizing your team and your organization?
Yeah, it depends on what your business is. And I can speak to financial services and tell you that this is super critical. And the reason that it's super critical, and by extension, a large investment, is a few things. One is the costliness of getting it wrong. We talked about this earlier, but if you're not able to provide service that's fast, that's competent, that's in context, you will have people switch. It's just invariable that something will go wrong for someone with their banking. And so it's a true make or break test for almost all of our members, at some point in their first few months of being a customer. So that's sort of number one. It's a big deal for churn, and it's a big deal for LTV for a customer. I think the second thing is not just, okay, is it a churn? Do you see it as an opportunity to actually grow your business? Is it an opportunity for you to introduce a new product or service, to build lifelong loyalty, to start a conversation and maybe be considered for a product that you wouldn't have been considered for before? And I'll say in financial services, that's almost always the case. Sure. You might start with a checking account and a savings account, but you move quickly into a credit card or a credit building service or a loan. And if you want to build trust in a way that gets you consideration for those things, yes, you have to build good products, but also in these make or break moments, you want to be able to use the engagement to explain some of that context of like, hey, this is why these things together work, or hey, had you considered doing this, maybe this problem would have been different. So I just think of it as a massive, massive area for growth, frankly, as a company. Now, the last part that I'll say that has nothing to do with the employers I've been at, but more just kind of looking forward and why to me it's worth investment, is sort of where all of this is going long term. I think in the past, we often looked at customers who try to contact us as people who are having an issue for sure, but you also look at it as a cost center, right? And so you're trying to drive those costs down. You don't really want someone contacting you all the time. But we don't look at things like emails or push notifications as cost centers. We often think of them as the opposite, where, oh, this is customer communication. This is good. We have a new product. We want people to read what we're saying. And so I think a lot of that is the underpinnings of cost, right? The underpinning of cost for a push notification is very low. You can send one to everyone. If they read it, you're really happy. If they read your emails, you're really happy. But the other way around, if they were to contact you, even if you could tell them the same content, you're not really thrilled. And again, that's because the cost of that equation is too high. As we look forward, obviously with AI, but also with just pure company efficiency, et cetera, I think those two things are going to get much closer to each other in cost. And so when they do, the question won't be, hey, how much of an investment should you be putting into people who call you or people who email you with problems? The question is going to be, how much do you value engagement and communication with your customer? That's stop. And there are going to be some versions of that where, you initiate it, and there's going to be other conditions where they initiate it. And so to me, it's inevitable. It's inevitable that this becomes a really valuable component of the relationship you keep with your customers. And whether you're financial services or not, that's going to be the sort of underpinning of a long relationship, is that do you have that attention? Do you have that conversation?
One of the things that's so interesting, I'm completely on the same page with you, right? You reorient from cost to value, is the way that your business runs internally entirely evolves, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly the relationship that you as a product leader would have with operations or support and the nature of that feedback flywheel is entirely turned on its head, right? So from your perspective, what is the future state of where in organizations like the ones you have led, like where do they live? Who are they working with? How do those working relationships change?
Yeah, I don't think they changed that much. I still think there'll always be some amount of operations and I think it's really how you think about them and how you goal those teams.
Yep.
And of course, operational leaders can tell you this in much more detail than I can. They have a really tough job. On one hand, they're going to be assessed by the quality of the service that they provide. Yep. So is it fast? Is it competent? Do people like it? Is it serving a need? And on the other hand, they're also beholden to the P&L, which is usually the L column for them. Like, how much are you spending doing that? I think that transformation is coming. Between them and marketers, I think you're going to start finding a lot more fusion, which the marketers are often seen as the people who are spending some money in order to generate growth.
Sure.
Operations, I don't know, is always seen that way. But mathematically, these things are quite the same. It's like, I'm going to spend some dollars, and either I'm going to acquire someone new or I'm going to retain someone I have. I'm either going to expand the portfolio of use through product marketing and lifecycle marketing. And in the future, I think it's going to be, hey, I'm going to expand the product use by what we would traditionally call customer support. So long term in the future, I see these things getting closer to each other. I see the operations folks seeing themselves as drivers of growth, both preventing churn, but also creating cross-sell. And maybe even in some cases, if we can get the cost profiles or processes low enough as outbound. And I think the truest version of this is to look at what we would consider maybe luxury consumer products. And lots of luxury consumer products are those that serve the very affluent. By their nature, could also be described as operations companies. These are shoemakers that have a person who can explain how the whole shoe is made on the floor of the business. We often don't call that operations. We would call that sales or customer service or anything else. And likewise, I think you're going to start seeing the same thing in companies that traditionally have seen themselves doing customer support. I think they're going to start seeing these folks as ambassadors of their brand, and they're going to be far more proactive, and they're going to be excited about having those conversations. So yeah, the KPIs will change. I think the names will start to change a little bit. But yeah, I think it's coming. Marketing and this form of operation specifically, I think we're going to start getting closer to each other around consumer storytelling.
It's almost cyclical, right? In a previous episode, we had the previous CEO of Bonobos on, and he had mentioned to us that the way that they were able to establish themselves as a brand is that customer support is not support, right? It is a value driver. It is not a cost center, to your point.
Exactly.
And so to some degree, it's like a necessary, up until this point, it's almost historically been a necessary source of spend because it's been retention driven. But when you give the team the opportunity to flex their muscles and not play so under the gun, I think you could start to do some really transformational stuff.
Totally. And we were talking about different industries too. I think you can look at, why do people want an actual doctor to talk to as a person? Why do many Americans still take their taxes to a person and say, hey, I understand it's a bunch of rules and I can just go through some software, but I'd love a person to talk to. TurboTax has been a very successful product for a long period of time. They're introducing people into their software over the last 2 years. That's not counterintuitive. It's very intuitive. And to some extent, the best version of support is going to be the ability to have a person to talk to you. And I think as you start seeing it that way for mass consumer products, we've always been promised in technology that the tech will enable scale. It'll enable scale. What happens when conversations are enabled at scale? A very, very interesting and very positive relationships probably start to come out of that. So as a product leader, my job is to make sure people don't have problems.
Sure.
They don't run into bugs, that they don't hit issues where they want to call us. That's true. I think in the future, though, it wouldn't be a bad sign for companies if they did have people who were calling them, or emailing them or chatting with them, not for problems, but just because they wanted to talk. And I think that is a great, great, great retention driver. It's probably coming.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I will say my wife was a doctor, so I'm glad to know there's still some job security in the that way when it's coming moving forward. One of the things that I'm constantly weighing with businesses, right, is what is safe to be automated and what should stay human. Because I think we fundamentally believe there is a role, Mason, you're describing, there is a role for humans to be in the loop here. It's more of a value driving role. If you're in that leadership seat, how do you decide automate this, personify this? What is your calculus there?
Yeah, I'll take a step back and try not to make I think this always gets people a little bit charged. But the good news is there's a spectrum. This is not you start at everything is done by a human and then you flip it to all of a sudden an AI agent is doing everything. And I think for each part of your company or each service you offer and to each type of problem, you can make a different decision. So that's the upside of all of this. But the second thing I'll say is we've historically moved technology forward. Even in spaces of support, there was a world, and I don't remember it, but I'm not that old, where there wasn't Zendesk. There wasn't a tool for keeping track of all of these tickets that you were getting. And that's okay. Then software showed up and they made it easier. Or, there wasn't a tool to pull up information that the customer wanted instantly at your fingertips. They had to be really, really trained agents, back, I guess, when there was just telephone calls. Right. We've clearly improved that onto, desktop tooling. So I think the first step is to think of it that way, which is any process you have today that's being audited, that you're training inside of, that you can measure, is a great place to start to introduce AI and see what happens. Let's not start to automate it. Let's start to augment the people that you have today, and let's measure how often are they on script with the SOPs? How often are they getting to resolution? How happy are people? How much faster are these interactions? And so you can start small and just build your way up. And so, for us, for example, you can start with a very specific type of problem. So a person who's wants to check their balance. This is a pretty low stakes. The app certainly does it. They don't want to get into their app, or they can't get into their app right now. Okay, wonderful. They want to know their balance. Great. We have a set of humans. We have an SOP. We have the information available. Maybe that's a good place to first start by augmenting people with some AI skills, and then eventually run a test where we say, what if AI only answers this question? How good can it do? I think a couple of things to think about also, which is unique. One is, what will your customers accept versus what will they not accept? I think that's really important. For the most part, historically, through the companies I've been at, what I found is most customers will accept any sort of software if it makes things faster, more competent, that speaks to them with great context. I've never seen too many customers say, like, I want to know what software the agent is using. They're just usually happy when the agent solves the problem really, really quickly. And they're usually unhappy when the agent doesn't solve the problem or takes a long time. So, but all that said, I'm sure there's other industries where people truly want to talk to a person. And so ethically, you'll figure out the line of like, okay, where should we test this with your own internal compass? But then you'll figure out very quickly from your customers, where will they accept this to be? I think the second thing I'll also call out really quickly here in sort of this change that's happening and where you can get started is, again, it all depends on sort of why you're doing it. If you're doing it because you want to truly improve the customer experience, and that's the point of view you're starting with, well, then augmentation is very easy. You can even augment your best agents and your best employees and your hardest problems. You can start there. Alternatively, which a lot of leaders, understandably are doing, if it's for cost reduction, great. You can start with the highest volume, lowest stakes stuff and move forward. So I don't think there's a playbook that's right. But what I will say is the big arc that I've seen both at companies I've worked at, but also with peers, is start by doing things in observable ways, things that you can see and feel before you automate it. Then choose some areas to start, getting a little bit more aggressive with automation, and then start to scale that over time. It's not really like a large, all at once kind of thing. It tends to be a little bit more.
No, it's funny. I mean, I was reading a report recently that a lot of sort of applied AI experiences tend to falter at the line because people don't know where to start and where to put it. Mm-hmm. But I actually think it's a relatively straightforward approach. And this is actually what I'll do in working with, partners at Decon as well. What is the list of problems, topics, intents? What are the issues that people are coming with? What impact do they represent to your business? What are you ready to support? Start at the top of the list, work your way down. Right? I think like in reality, the journey that folks go on does not need to be massively transformational all at once. And in fact, it probably is to your detriment to do so. You'd rather take people along on this journey, help them, like not only the internal business stakeholders, but also your customers understand what value you can provide for them, and slowly bring them to the point where you're creating that content.
You see this with a lot of technology. Like cars are a great example of this. Like we've had technology that enables cars to be controlled and automated for a long period of time. And that was very scary to the public for a long period of time. It still is. And all the data in the world that says, hey, fatalities are reduced by robot drivers, these are the number of errors that humans make. Sure, that'll make a difference. But in reality, what people need is usually like a step-by-step path to getting there. So it starts with, warnings when something's happening in your lane. And then before you know it, we're very resilient as humans. We're like, oh yeah, those warnings are really good. I don't have to pay attention to them. And then you get sort of the lane correction or like cruise assist that starts to show up. And then you sort of get the turn assist. Before you know it, it's like, oh yeah, I've seen it do this. I've seen it do this. I've seen it do this. Now I feel really comfortable getting to the last stop. Like, don't underestimate how much of that is true inside an organization as well. Yeah. You have professionals who have really built careers on the back of taking certain actions and using judgment and knowing, nuanced differences between this is a good time to resolution, this is a bad time to resolution. Showing up tomorrow and telling them you're automating everything, you're going to get the same response. So, for the most part, I just think it's like, hey, take advantage of the people that you have, to your point, take your steps, go slowly, one at a time. And it goes way faster than you think once you get started because we are resilient and we are very quick to pick up. And your operations leaders, they've been thinking about this way more than anybody else. They're going to figure it out pretty fast.
Yeah, makes sense. I love the driverless example, right? As somebody based in San Francisco, it's not uncommon for me to see a car without someone in the front seat driving through. We were talking before about my family from the Midwestern United States. I send them a picture of a driverless car. They say, get out of that thing right away. What are you doing right now, right? This is a death trap. So it's a very similar story around any sort of natural adoption curve. Last question for you, right? How do you scale this personalization, this trust and responsiveness without slowing down progress? I think like most of the business leaders I talk to see it as a tension. We can either move faster, right, and do new things, or we can move slower and provide better quality. I think a lot of people are seeing these things at odds with one another. You're leading large teams, right? I mean, ultimately, the businesses that you are building and helping lead have downstream implications on millions and millions of people. How do you weigh the trade-offs?
Yeah, I don't think that quality and velocity are enemies of each other. I think that the two go together. There's a lot of quotes and there's a lot of people who think about this, but I think really what's most important is that you have a good way of doing things, then you bake it down into a process that you believe is scalable, and you execute that scalable process over and over again, freeing yourself up, freeing your own creative capacity, freeing your own execution capacity for the next task. I think it gets really challenging is when you say, okay, well, in order to provide great X, I need to keep going slow. It's just you may not know why something great is happening, not that you know exactly why it's happening. Now, there are some industries where that's not going to be the case. You know that something takes time. I'm a big fan of eating barbecue. There is no fast way to smoke ribs. There just isn't. That's not going to happen. Yeah, not yet. And if they ever do figure that out, I'll be first in line. But there are hours. It just takes hours. That's true. But that doesn't mean that the process can't be put into a better place where someone can make more of them in a way that makes sense. It just means that their time management needs to be a little bit tighter, and the processes and sort of the skills they invest in are slightly different. So, okay, what does it look like when we open the store at 4:00 in the morning? How good can we do at that process? And then, yes, of course, it's going to take us 12 to 16 hours for these to smoke. No big deal. And so I look at the same thing in software and product building, which is what are the things that have to take time just because the nature of what they do versus what are the things that take time because you haven't yet figured out the process or because you haven't yet found ways to do your job more efficiently. And so I think you can get tremendous quality when you've repeated a process over and over again. Where does quality come from? It comes from consistency, predictability, nuance, measurement, observability, a high standard. You can replicate those things relatively fast. That's not to say that that's easy, but you definitely can replicate those things fast. So I don't really buy into quality and velocity being at odds, except for when you're in a gray space and you truly don't know, how to operate. In which case, taking your time is definitely a good thing. So to that end, it goes all the way back. Maybe I'm a broken record today on just start somewhere, just start slow and take your first steps. Learn what are you seeing that's positive and what's not positive. Don't try to do the whole thing all at once. So, you were saying you work with companies. I think that's the same thing we work with internally and the same thing I hear my peers say. We're not trying to sell a giant AI program of 5 years of transformation. What we want to do is we want to figure out, can our help center be really good? Can we get our help center to go from where it is today to one level higher? And can we do that in 2 weeks? Can we do that in 1 week? What does that look like? And what partners are going to be able to help us do that? What people internally are excited about doing that? And how do we know we did it? And as soon as you start taking those kind of more methodical steps, quickly you start figuring out, okay, here's where investments of time are paying off. Here's where investments of time are not paying off. Here are the people internally that I'm excited about, putting on these tasks. Here are the people who, frankly, maybe they're not as excited about doing it. We're not getting the most out of it. And then that sets you apart. And after a while, it becomes like a rhythm. The thing I'll also call out is there's a lot of doomerism right now on all things AI. And I understand it and I think about it a lot. But at the end of the day, we're all people. And I think there's fear and there's excitement. And most people got into technology because they like to build stuff. They want to be able to build a great experience. They want to be able to build a product, build an app, build a great marketing campaign, deliver something into the world, that didn't before. I think you can change the mentality very quickly internally when you recast things as building. And so for companies that are struggling to get started, it might be because you're feeling the pressure of, hey, everyone's doing this. You have to do it. If you don't do it, it's going to eat your job. And that is definitely stress inducing. There's no doubt about it. But as soon as we can switch that mentality a little bit and say, hey, we're going to build something great together. That's what we're all doing. And yeah, sure, other people are doing what they're doing, but our teams, we're going to build the right way for our company to do this. you find the right partners, things change much faster. People's brains are wired to be a little bit more excited, and excitement tends to usually lead both quality and velocity.
Sure. Makes a ton of sense. I think the barbecue example is apt, right? If you do this right and you do it in an operationally efficient way, people are lining up outside the door at 4 a.m. waiting for food, right?
They will be. And I think we're entering the great era of service. Like, it's coming now. Like, it truly is. Just as mobile apps change what people expect from companies, and like how I want to interact with them and what they should look like, I think we're about to start to see AI change the sort of expectations of how you interact with companies. And so I think we're entering this golden era now where, you can go into it and say, oh my goodness, I have to capture all of this potential cost saving. Or you can say, we're going to build something phenomenal. We're going to build something we never were able to build before, which is probably the reason we got into this business. And we're going to do that when we embrace, using AI, using agents to try to deliver this service alongside our vision for what we think that service should be. So I'm excited. I'm more optimistic than I am worried, but you have to kind of work through your teams in the same way.
I'm biased, right? I maintain the same. I maintain the same position as you do. But Madhu, listen, super interesting conversation. Really appreciate the insights. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Max. Appreciate it.